So the other article that I'm sure you saw was the York News Times article that came out about moving it. There's a statement the museum is completely empty now. It really isn't. The Pioneer Room, the two Victorian rooms still have furniture in them. The sprinkler system is going into the sides, so they did not need to be emptied. So we have treadle machines and furniture, cast iron stove. Those are all still there. The quilts, they're all still there in it. We also mentioned that in the last 6.5 years, the community center had seen 135,000 plus visitors for fitness purposes, and only 1,845 visitors to the museum during that same amount of time. That the museum averaged 26 people per month. Early on, when the children's groups and other groups came in, the numbers were better, but it dropped off drastically in 2017. That quote's attributed to Cherie. So I will humbly disagree with that for a couple reasons. The 1,845 number, don't know where it came from. People do not log in to go into the museum. People do not pay a fee, so you don't have an income that you're tracking. We have a visitor's log that was in a roll-top desk to the side, 1 foot in the door, but if you walked in the door and you weren't looking down inside of a table, you don't sign them. A lot of people don't sign because they just don't like to sign them. There was no way to accurately come up with 1,845. Zero. None. Nada. In fact, the book that they log in was already boxed up months earlier, and nobody asked me for it. So I don't know where the number came from. I've been there as an average 60 hours to 70 hours a week for the last 3 months. And I can guarantee you, even with the museum mostly emptied, we've had more people than that. There was a comment that most of the people are coming from people waiting for others. And that's true. I cannot begin to tell you how many times parents are there waiting for somebody. The doors are now open, so they see that there's a museum, and they come in, and then they come back days later, or they come back earlier for the next swimming lesson with kids in tow, and they work together as a family. If you look at that door, if the doors are closed, you have a sign this big that says Palmer Museum. There's no other advertising to even show it's there. So yes, it's hard to find. I will be the first to admit that. Are numbers down? Yes, but just think. In 2017, I wasn't there, can't tell you anything about it. Same goes for 18. 2019, which would be the first time the school tours came through, I did a school tour. In 2020, we were closed because of COVID. Couldn't do any tours. And this year, we're not into the season yet for the kids to come. So are the numbers down from 17? Yes. Is there a reason? Yes. Could it be changed? Yes. One of the things that needs to be done to make your museum be an active museum is we need to rethink what kind of museum we have. Do we want a museum where you have 8,000 objects and you're bending over and looking in display cases, or do you want displays that actually tell you a story of what those irons are or what those items are? So when I got there, there's a display case and it had close to 24 sat irons. Anybody not know what a sat iron is? The old-fashioned Pioneer iron, you heat them up on a stove. People could look in, see all of those, read a sign, says they're sat irons, who donated them, and that's it. But if you have 2 irons on display and explain what they do, and you have one that a kid can lift up, that's a totally different experience. If you have laundry equipment that are used there, including a washboard, that's quite different than saying that Pioneer probably had to haul water from a creek to be able to wash clothes. Part of that water was used to make lye soap. They would have to run water through wood ash along with rendered meat fat and make soap. You hauled your water, you made your soap, then you washed your clothes by hand. That's a whole different thing than seeing a washboard and 5 bricks of lye soap sitting on a counter. It's a totally different experience. If you have a cabin and you're looking at it and it has a bed, that's a full-size bed, that's quite different than you see a storyboard that says the original homesteader's inside dimensions of his cabin were 14 by 14. He had the husband, the wife, and 6 kids. The interior dimensions, 1 room, log house, 1 story, for an affidavit he signed. 8 people were living in that space. They ate there, they slept there, they cooked there. That's a different experience. I took off the door so people can walk in. I want to put up storyboards when they're looking at a bed, explains that they had trundle beds, and the kids slept the short way. Looking at a full-size bed in a corner of a room doesn't tell you anything. Trying to imagine how 8 people slept in that room does. Same thing that if you go over to any area that's there. If you go to the Civil War veterans, to know, here's a picture not only of a man, as an old man who was a Civil War veteran, but as a young teenager, he was a drummer in the Civil War. That story makes a difference of how you perceive your history. It makes a difference on how children perceive their own history. You have children being drummers in the war. You had children that collected milkweeds during World War II because the source for the government for life vests had disappeared, and it was the children collecting milkweeds that they used to make the vests for our soldiers. It was the children in the 1890s that tracked the birds that were living in New York County that today still stands a document of what they did. There's children that said the first 4th of July in our county we needed a flag, and of all the things people brought, nobody had brought a flag. And even though there was a limited wardrobe for anybody living here in the early 1870s, they were willing to give up one of their probably 3 dresses to say, I'll give up my red one if you give up your white one, and Mrs. Baker says she'll give us some blue, and we can have a flag. It was children that said we had to have a flag, and our first flag was made of turkey red calico. Now, I can put all the flags up in the world, but that story makes a difference. When I had the kids in for that 4th grade tour, and we were standing at the covered wagon, I said, you know, kids wouldn't have ridden in this wagon. They would have walked alongside this wagon. And they would have been barefoot because the place you're going, you aren't going to be able to buy shoes. So I asked the kids, if you had to walk from right now where you're standing in the community center down to McDonald's and back, barefoot, long trip, short trip? Well, the boys all said short trip, girls all said, oh no. I said, what if you had to do it twice? Or better yet, what if you had to do it 3 times? Oh, that would be a long trip. What if you had to do it 3 times every single day for over a month? That's a story. You can show agricultural equipment, but it is telling the story of the lady whose husband was ill and they needed a crop of corn, and she took a shovel in virgin soil, made a crack, dropped in 3 seeds of corn, stepped over, made a crack, dropped 3 seeds of corn, and again, and that whole first crop was planted by her, 3 kernels at a time, and she had 4 kids under the age of 5, but she was also watching. That's the difference between a museum and objects and a museum and stories. Why did the people come? Why did they choose York? What was their life like? How it had changed by 1900. These are all stories in the museum, and quite frankly, I can't tell those stories in the auditorium. You've got a large part of that room that's down to 7 feet. I can't even put a display case in that area. You don't have rooms for a Pioneer Room. You don't have the Victorian rooms, but that's the largest part of our collection.